Welcome to Conversations with the Authors.
Welcome back to Conversations with the Authors. I'm your host, Daniel.
And I'm Daryl.
And I'm Sandra.
And thank you, dear listeners and readers, for tuning in. Thank you, Alexander Nakarada, for the wonderful intro. Some would say that love was meant for fairy tales, right? Sandra and Daryl, you conquer love quite a bit in your story. And today we're going to talk about love interests and hate interests. Now, we talked before about protagonists and antagonists, which are the bad guys and the good guys and the bad guys, respectively. Mm-hmm. And this coined term of a contagonist, which sort of gets in the way of the main characters and, you know, is neither good nor bad, but he's sort of an obstacle character. And that's a rare term. You don't hear it often. But also, too, is the phrase hate interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hate, that's kind of a rare thing. I don't know if it's, I guess it's a coined term we have here, a hate interest. We all know of the love interest.
Right. Yes, and you define love interest as?
A love interest is that person with whom usually the protagonist has a relationship with, a love relationship.
Right.
And it is something that either begins in the story or along the lines it develops.
Right. And, Sandy, you would agree that the hate interest is really just sort of the antithesis, sort of the opposite of whatever the love interest is, right? Not necessarily good, not necessarily evil, but, he or she doesn't have the best intentions for our characters and or our stories.
I think that's kind of what we mean by hate, right?
Yeah.
I would say that is. I would also say that it's a perceived irritant.
Right. Okay, yeah.
That causes everything to move forward, either good or evil.
And I think it comes in degrees, too, because you might have someone he doesn't really hate the person, but doesn't have their interest at heart, or they have their own interest at heart, and they're like a thorn in the paw of that character, that protagonist.
Yes. And this is a very interesting sort of story and character dynamic in storytelling, and particularly in love interests and hate interests, and we're sort of going to explore how that sort of played out in How Nicholas Became Santa Claus, your highly rated, Eric Hoffer-nominated sci-fi fantasy novel. It's an amazing story. It's a page-turner. I guarantee you, if you read the first page, you're not going to want to stop. So we defined what we consider. Now, this is not a TED Talk, so we're not, this is not a lecture on writing. This is just sort of our opinions. It's non-scripted, but if you hear ruffles of pages, we've got notes and such that we're sort of referring to just to stay on track. And we explained sort of what love interests and hate interests are. And so how would you describe how these character roles play when it comes to storytelling?
Well, I think it can be a very important part of the story because it helps you see the development of the character. Mm-hmm. And the love interest can affect the protagonist in many ways. Sometimes the love interest is what we call the impact character.
Yes.
Because that person, he or she, has the most influence, whether for good or bad, or on the character, on the protagonist, and it's someone that really has good intentions. Mm-hmm. Sometimes good intentions lead to good direction. Sometimes they lead to
and the love interest is a driver for the story.
Yes,
it provides a medium for the plot to unfold and such.
You know what they say? They say love makes the world go round,
yes.
But it makes the story go too.
Yes.
And it also, I think it's something that shows you that your character is multidimensional too.
And would you agree with that, Sandy?
I would, and I would say love in the Nicholas story.
Yes.
doesn't necessarily have to be love of person. It can be love of station.
Yes.
Or perceived station.
Well, in stories, and not in this story necessarily, but in some stories, it's love for a creature.
Right.
Sometimes like my friend Flick horse stories, Lassie and all of those things.
What was it? Where the wild things are.
Right.
He was driven not necessarily by the love of a woman. But as the movie trailers, so I'm not spoiling anything, show, he has a great love of animals and mythical creatures.
Not all love interests are romantic love. And
I look at Anna and Elsa.
Oh, yeah, I was going to mention
so
that.
It's the love of siblings, right?
Yeah, sisterly love, brotherly love, yes, of course.
Now, on the flip side of that, we have what we again coined as hate interests. So, to keep my thoughts in line here, how would these characters then drive the conflict and the tension? Our love interests drive the plot and drive the motivations and emotions.
There's an old saying in my field, I'm in psychiatry, is that you really can't have strong emotions for someone like hate unless you've had some kind of love,
right?
And
so there cannot be anti-hatred.
I mean, when you meet you just can't hate somebody. Right. You can have a feeling of enmity. You can have all kinds of negative feelings, but to really hate that's the flip side of love.
Yes. Yes. And we see hate interest characters aren't necessarily evil. For instance, take Draco Malfoy.
That's right.
From the Harry Potter series. He wasn't necessarily evil, but he had this instilled sort of by his family this hatred of Muggles, because they weren't pure born and weren't of magic and this and that, and that was sort of his motivation, but it didn't necessarily make him an evil character.
I think a lot of us, though, when we think of love interest, we think of an individual or a character that has vested interest in the protagonist.
Yes.
And oftentimes we think of someone in a romantic relationship. And that's important because that's just another dimension of human life. The hate interest. I've got a pretty good example, I think. It's love turned to hate, for instance.
Yes.
Does anybody remember the movie The Great and Powerful?
Yes.
When James Franco's character Oz came there, he was in love. He fell in love with Theodora, which was Mila Kunis's character.
Right. Yes.
And then at some point through the movie, and no spoilers here, she had the greatest hate for him when she was turned by her sister or taught to believe that he didn't have her best interest at heart.
Right.
She was a hate interest.
In that same sort of vein, I suppose, you might argue that, for instance, Anakin Skywalker, we all know him as Darth Vader. He had this great rivalry with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker, and his hatred... his hate interest became the Jedi Masters, not necessarily because
I think Obi-Wan was like a father to him. He was
we were like brothers, Anakin, and he believed so strongly in the Jedi Order, and when they failed to see his talents and denied him the ability to be a Jedi Master, the rest of the story ensues. And I think that's sort of as you're saying, he had to have this great, love and or affinity for both the characters and his philosophy,
right,
in order to spawn such a hatred, which now he feeds off of.
Right.
I don't know if anybody out there is a fan of history, but I am. And if you know the story of Benedict Arnold, the reason Benedict Arnold turned against the American forces, and particularly George Washington, is because he thought that he should have got a promotion that George Washington did not give him. He gave it to somebody else. And he hated Washington so bad, that he became a turncoat.
Yes. And Sandy, so what are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are sometimes these rivalries are not just between strangers. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest love-hate driven stories are siblings.
When we talk about siblings, particularly, this rivalry would be Cain and Abel in the Bible. I mean, they're the sibling rivalry. It's a love and hate interest between, brothers.
In fact, in How Nicholas Became Santa Claus, one of some of the driving forces are between siblings. Mm-hmm. Love and hate between siblings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I chose to have the power of three mm-hmm. siblings that were being designated by their father, who is passing away, and his king, who will run the kingdom. Mm-hmm. Love makes the world go round.
Well, then you have Nicholas coming of age and meeting someone also later that, and I don't want to give it away, that becomes a love interest too. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going to give that away.
So for our fellow writers who are starting with a clear understanding of your story's theme and character arcs, and develop love and hate interests that serve the themes and push the protagonists, our good guys or what have you, to push their growth, don't be afraid to explore the complexities of human emotions. So when you're
draw on the human emotions that are around you.
But I know somebody's out there is probably saying, well, aren't you saying the antagonist? Well, there's a love interest in the antagonist too.
Absolutely.
And so how many? Even though you're a bad guy or a bad girl, you may have a love interest that's either for you or against you, for one purpose or another. We can think of lots of, various mobsters stories, even The Godfather, where there was love interest going on.
Look at, for instance, DC's The Joker and Harley Quinn. Ever since, the Adventures of Batman in the 90s, we've had this Harley Quinn character who has, for hell or high water, loved the Joker as insane as he is. There's motivation on that end too. Maybe not necessarily for him, but for her. And it's still part of what makes them grow, I think.
There's someone out there for everyone, isn't there?
So
there is.
I'm going to preface this question with the, as we always say, so long as it drives the story. What other advice might you have for our authors who and our readers and our listeners who are contemplating or trying to create these sort of relationships, dealing with the love interests and the hate interests?
Don't be afraid to draw from the people that you see around you. People watch. Go ahead and people watch. See who's doing what and see if you can figure out why.
You want to round out your characters, and you want to give them dimension, as I've been saying before. They love people, they hate people, they have indifference for some people, and there's all types of relationships. Choose the ones that are appropriate for the story, but make your character a full person. Right. It's much more interesting that way.
Right. Remember that these characters are sort of counterpoint, and but even so, they balance each other. For one, for every sort of evil intention, there's a good intention. For every way of going about doing something, there's an adverse way of going about doing it. And it has to, as I said before, drive the story, and it has to add to both the story itself, the plot, but it has to lead to some sort of character development in one way or another.
And you have many avenues, I think, to go about this, because you can do arc characters, archetypes. Mm-hmm. You can have a complex character too, And so that has many dimensions.
Yes, and remember that the sort of the bad guy, the antagonist, the hate interests, these are meant to build challenges for our characters. These are meant to help our characters navigate, grow, facilitate some sort of idea, philosophy, emotion, or what have you. But, play around with it. Look at some of your favorite writers and see what they do, see what they've done, see how you can, and if they've done it, see how you can do it better, as my sister would say. She says, well, they may have done it that way, but how could you do it better? And I think that's the draw you should take from it.
And don't be afraid to not get it right.
Right. A whole part of writing is rewriting. Okay. When I was in film school, my dad was always helping me with my writing. And one of the things he taught me, and for me it was true, if you're writing a script, if you're writing anything, your first draft, you should be rewritten like 7 times. I had a script that I did for class, and for some other work that I did, and I always did a number of rewrites on the first draft before I was ready for my second draft. Right? So, I mean, and that's sort of what to remember, right?
Yeah, and I think there's an old saying in writing that if it was written only once, it was never written. So you have to continue to go over it. I remember a little story, about the author of Farewell to Arms, who he wrote the ending of the story 44 times. Mm-hmm. Ernest Hemingway was Ernest Hemingway, but he knew he had to rewrite it till he got it right.
Right. And that's like Mas was saying, you want to do it and do it right. And like my grandmother says,
I have another idea. We're getting these ideas, man.
She's texting me. She says that if you're going to say something, make sure that your intentions are clear. If it can be misconstrued, rewrite it. If the idea, if the plot, if the tone you're trying to create can be misinterpreted as something else, rewrite it until it sounds the way it should.
And with the love interest, as the relationship grows, don't force it. That is, don't make it stick if it's not working. The mechanics of it all has to work. It has to be smooth. You have to finesse this, so a love relationship builds.
Right. And it's very similar to what you were saying about the story itself. In our earlier podcast, we were talking about writing a story and rewrites and this and that. And your advice, Ma and Dad, Ma, you said that it should write itself. It should drive itself. If you force it, your audience will know. If you're forcing love,
it's not going to really work if you force it.
And that's how love works, guys. If you have to force it, it's not going to work. So today's discussion was about love interests and hate interests and writing, and I hope that you gained some valuable insight into the character dynamics and enhancing your storytelling. And if you really want to see how this can be masterfully crafted, you can check out our Facebook. You can check out our website at troopbooks.com, where you can land on the author page and pick up a copy of the softcover or the hardcover. Check out our Facebook, our TikTok, our X, our Instagram at troopbooks.com. It's all Troop Books. And I hope that you've learned something interesting. I hope that you can join the conversation. If you have some ideas, let us know. Hit us up with some comments. If we like your topic, maybe we'll talk about it. And I'll talk to you next time on Conversations with the Authors.